You sat through something today that you weren't actually enjoying. Maybe it was a movie, maybe it was a show, maybe it was just a meeting that should have ended an hour ago. But the reason you didn't walk out has nothing to do with how good it was. It's not patience, it's not curiosity, it's a decision making bug so old that mice fall for it, rats fall for it, and you fall for it every single week. Here's the strange part nobody tells you. The moment you've already spent something, whether that's money, time, or effort, your brain stops asking, is this worth it going forward? And starts asking a completely different question. It starts asking, how do I avoid feeling like I wasted that? Those are not the same question, but your brain treats them like they are. Economists have a name for this. They call it the sunk cost effect, and it describes something oddly specific. The more you've already put into something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when walking away is obviously the smarter move. Why would a brain, built by evolution, make such an obviously bad trade? It didn't build it as a mistake, it built it as a shortcut for a world that rarely offered do overs. Picture your ancestors deciding whether to keep following a wounded animal through difficult terrain. Hours already spent tracking it, energy already spent chasing it, legs aching, light starting to fade. Turning back now feels like admitting all of that was wasted, pushing forward, even into worse terrain, even as the trail gets colder and the risk gets higher, feels like the option that protects the investment already made. In a world with no supermarkets and no guaranteed next meal, that instinct made sense more often than not. Rewards were scarce enough and effort expensive enough that finishing what you started usually beat abandoning it halfway. A brain that gave up too easily, too often, starved. A brain that pushed through past the point of good sense, at least sometimes brought home dinner. Evolution doesn't reward perfect logic. It rewards whatever strategy leaves more copies of itself behind. And finish what you started cleared that bar often enough to stick around for a very long time. But what about a world where the hunt is a bad show and a stock that's already down 40%? The psychologist Hal Arkes and his colleague Catherine Blumer ran one of the clearest demonstrations of this back in 1985. In one experiment, they described a company that had already spent millions of dollars developing a radar blank airplane and asked people whether the company should keep funding it, even though a rival's plane was now cheaper and better. When people were told about the money already spent, the vast majority said, keep going. When the exact same scenario was described without mentioning the prior investment, almost nobody chose to continue. Same facts, same plane, same rival advantage. The only thing that changed was whether people knew what had already been spent, and that single detail flipped the decision almost completely. Think about how strange that actually is. Nothing about the plane changed. Nothing about the rival's advantage changed. The only variable was a number describing money that was already gone, no matter what anyone decided next. And that single, irrelevant number was enough to flip the majority decision from abandon to continue. Arkes and Blumer didn't stop at hypothetical airplanes. They tracked real people buying real season tickets to a university theater. Some had paid full price. Others at random had been given a discount. Nobody chose their own price, so there was no reason to think the discounted seats were somehow worse. But the full price ticket holders showed up to noticeably more performances over the season, even on bad weather nights, even for shows they weren't especially excited about. The only difference between the two groups was how much they had already paid, and that number alone changed how often they dragged themselves out the door. Arkes and Bluma had a specific explanation for why this happens, and it isn't about the money itself. It's about what economists call waste aversion, a deep discomfort with the idea of having thrown something away for nothing. Walking away from the discounted ticket doesn't feel wasteful because there was never much invested to waste. Walking away from the full price ticket feels like admitting the whole thing was pointless, and that feeling, not the actual dollar value, is what pulls people back out the door on a freezing Tuesday night to watch a play they don't even want to see. Here's the open loop worth holding on to because the story gets stranger from here, and it involves creatures that have never seen a dollar bill in their lives. You might assume this bias is a uniquely human flaw, something that comes from culture or from being taught not to waste money. If that were true, animals with no concept of money should be completely immune to it. They're not. In 2018, a team of researchers led by Brian Swice published a study in the journal Science testing mice, rats, and humans on strikingly similar decision making tasks. Each subject had to decide, in the middle of waiting for a reward, whether to keep waiting or cut their losses and move on to the next opportunity. Mice and rats made their choice while running through a maze of reward zones, timing exactly how long they'd wait before giving up. Humans played a comparable waiting game on a screen. Across all three species, the same pattern showed up. The longer they'd already waited, the more likely they were to keep waiting, even when the smarter move was clearly to leave and try somewhere else. Mice, rats, humans, three different brains separated by tens of millions of years of evolution, all making the same mistake in the same direction in tasks that involve no money, no culture, and no concept of wastefulness that anyone had to teach them. That's the twist hiding underneath the whole idea. This was never a uniquely human failure of willpower. It's a decision making pattern old enough to predate humans entirely, wired into brains long before anyone had stocks, subscriptions, or bad sequels to sit through. So, what is it actually protecting you from if it's not protecting your wallet? Arkes and Blumer's own explanation is almost embarrassingly simple. It isn't about maximizing outcomes at all. It's about avoiding the feeling of having wasted something. Continuing to fund the failing plane doesn't make the company richer. Sitting through the bad movie doesn't make the evening better. But quitting forces you to admit, right now, in this exact moment, that the investment is gone, and that feeling is what your brain is actually trying to dodge. That single detail explains why sunk cost shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. The gym membership you keep paying for because canceling would mean admitting the first 6 months didn't count. The relationship you stay in longer than you should because of how much time you've already put in. The stock you keep holding or even buying more of specifically because it's already down, as if buying more could somehow undo the first loss. The half read book you force yourself to finish, the home renovation you keep expanding because stopping now would mean the money already spent bought nothing. None of these decisions are being made by looking forward. All of them are being made by looking backward, trying to protect a cost that mathematically is already gone no matter what you choose next. And that's the part that should really sit with you. Sunk costs are, by definition, unrecoverable. The money's spent either way, the time is gone either way. The only real decision in front of you is what to do from this exact moment forward, and your ancient brain is remarkably bad at seeing that clearly because it never evolved to. Does knowing all of this actually make you immune to it? Not even close. Researchers studying this bias have found it thriving in professional settings too, in managers who keep funding failing projects specifically because so much has already gone into them. A pattern researcher, Barry Staw, named Escalation of commitment back in the 1970s. In his research, decision makers who had personally approved an initial investment were significantly more likely to approve additional funding for that same project after it started failing compared to decision makers who inherited the same failing project from someone else. The people with the most sunk cost invested, emotionally as well as financially, were the ones most likely to throw good resources after bad. People whose entire job is making rational resource decisions still fall for the exact same trap that made your ancestor keep chasing a wounded animal into worse terrain. Knowing the name of a bias and being immune to it turn out to be two very different things. And the gap between them is exactly where most bad decisions live. So the next time you catch yourself finishing a show you don't like or holding on to something you know isn't working, that feeling isn't weakness and it isn't stupidity. It's a decision making shortcut old enough to show up in mice, built for a world where finishing what you started usually paid off. It just hasn't caught up to a world full of bad sequels, sunk investments, and subscriptions you forgot to cancel. The only real question every time is the same one, not what you've already spent, but what happens from here if you stay versus what happens from here if you leave. Everything before that moment is already gone, no matter which one you choose. There's something almost freeing in that once it actually lands. The bad movie doesn't owe you anything for the time you've already given it. The failing investment doesn't care how loyal you've been to it. The only thing that ever actually mattered was sitting there in front of you the whole time, not the past, just the next decision. If you made it this far without giving up on this video, that's worth noticing. For once, that's actually a good use of the very instinct this video just spent the last few minutes taking apart. Thank you for sitting with this one. If you want to keep understanding why your brain handles money, time, and decisions the way it does, subscribe. There's a new episode every week. Taking apart another instinct you never noticed was running the show. Because the next time you sit through something today that you're not enjoying, you'll know exactly which ancient shortcut is quietly making that decision for you.